Coming up on Bridge City News, a first in the province, a Picture Butte man has been charged for 3D printing firearm parts. As 5 clients test positive for COVID-19 at a Calgary homeless shelter, what are we doing in Lethbridge to prevent the same outcome? And a pilot project will redirect up to 5,000 911 calls in Red Deer.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Loris Alexander, filling in for Hal Roberts. A normally quiet street in Oshawa erupted in chaos Friday when an early morning shooting left 5 family members dead and sent a woman to hospital with serious injuries. The suspected gunman died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and officers aren't looking for any other suspects. 4 of the deceased were male and 1 was female. 2 of the males were under the age of 18. The surviving victim, who's now recovering in hospital, is a 50-year-old woman.
I didn't know what that was. And it was banging and then a pause and then more banging and then screaming, like a female screaming. And I didn't know where it was coming from. I didn't come outside. I was just trying to look through the windows. And I thought maybe it was a house further on. I didn't know it was right next door. But then the noise started again, the bang, bang, and then I heard the sirens coming, so I thought, oh no, this is, something bad's happening. So, and then the police were coming, and then they were all parked around the front of this house, and they were bent down with their guns pulled. Oh, it was very frightening to see.
Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Henshaw, explains physical distancing measures in classrooms and the benefits and risks involved.
Guidance was first released on school reopening in June. The distancing measures in classrooms were identical to what they are now. That is, where 2 meters is possible between seated students, that is the goal. But where it is not possible, maximum spacing with students not facing each other is an acceptable alternative. This guidance was developed after many conversations on the benefits and risks of moving to a model such as Scenario 2, where it would be possible to keep 2 meters of distance between all students in a classroom. In Scenario 2, classes are split in half. Students spend half the week in a classroom and half the week at home doing remote learning. This option enables smaller class sizes and wider distancing, but it brings other risks and challenges. This includes additional costs of childcare for parents who are working, or the possibility that some families may need to rely on grandparents for that half of the week that students are not at school, which could put those older Albertans at risk.
Criminals are getting their hands on illegal guns by building them using 3D printing technology. The Alberta Law Enforcement Response Team, alongside the RCMP, made their first arrest involving this technology Thursday. 53-year-old Dan Forsyth of Picture Butte was arrested on multiple charges in relation to building and potential trafficking of these guns. RCMP's National Weapons Enforcement Support Team says that it's getting easier for criminals to curate their own weapons, and they are nearly impossible to trace.
Public safety, which is why we are focused on training and focused on investigating, prosecuting these offenses. I think what's important for people to understand is that although it may be very easy to find a data file online, and you may think it's fun to try it out and print even a component, but if a firearm or whatever, and if you do so, I think it's really important for the public to understand that that in itself is a criminal offense. You cannot print firearms in Canada unless you have the appropriate business license. 2-3 years ago, I don't know if this was even on the radar. I know that, again, anecdotally, people talking, but just over the last 2 years, NWest, our unit, has been really focused on training our officers, and we are seeing more files like this one down south in Alberta. I can't speak to the exact numbers, but I am aware that there are other investigations ongoing from the West Coast to the East Coast.
A homeless shelter in downtown Calgary is working to contain an outbreak of COVID-19 after 5 people staying there tested positive for the virus. The shelter has a satellite location in Lethbridge, and video journalist Naveen Day visited the area to learn more about the precautions being taken to stop the spread.
Here in Lethbridge, Alpha House provides an immediate safe shelter for withdrawal management of individuals under the influence of substances. Along with relationship-focused supports, they offer showers, food, and laundry, which could spell a recipe for COVID spread. Communications and Funds Development Coordinator for the shelter, Chandra Bruval, says the shelter follows strict guidelines to reduce the spread.
We are making sure that we're keeping client beds at least 2 meters apart. Where we're able to, all clients, no matter what program they're entering into, are screened for symptoms. So we do check their temperature, we spray their hands, we go through the assessment list of symptoms to make sure that they aren't presenting with any symptoms. If that does change, we are able to immediately isolate that individual.
However, neighbors around the shelters are noticing homeless people are opting to sleep outside rather than in the shelters for varying reasons.
I do think that some of the shelters have a tendency to be a little too strict with things. For example, I'm aware that a lot of people simply can't use a blanket or a pillow, and that goes back to the fact that there were bugs at one point. I do know a lot of people that would prefer to sleep outside, especially in summer, and a lot of people those who choose that, I think one of the issues is they have trouble following rules. One of the reasons they're homeless might very well be that they have been unable to accept societal norms.
As of September 3rd, Lethbridge has 16 active cases of COVID-19, 10 of which are in West Lethbridge, 4 in South, and 2 in North Lethbridge. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Dr. Teresa Tam says cooler weather and autumn celebrations starting with Labor Day weekend will mean new COVID-19 risks. She says if everyone follows well-known advice about wearing masks, staying distant, and not spending time indoors with lots of other people, we can keep the pandemic at a manageable level.
Right now, the rise in cases is in young adults, and there is something that we can do about this. So again, you can actually reduce this by everybody following public health measures, which is what all of my colleagues around the country are trying to do. They will have no hesitation to increase public health measures should they see that things are not going in the right direction. But none of us wants to go backwards. So the only way to not sort of go back and, have more restrictive public health measures is if everybody actually does their part. A lot of the clusters or outbreaks are in private settings, within families, parties. But if they see there's more cases in pubs, karaoke, and those situations that cannot be managed by increased sort of review of the existing measures, I'm sure they'll do whatever they need to reduce the cases.
The City of Red Deer has started a pilot project called the Social Diversion Program. The goal of the program is to divert non-emergency calls away from 911 to a new call station aptly labeled 211. The planning manager for the City of Red Deer says that this new program could divert up to 5,000 calls away from 911 and free up space for more pressing calls.
So social diversion in the Red Deer context is really referring to the creation of a service delivery model for at-risk, high-need individuals that in the time of crisis would need a benefit from an intervention-based but non-emergency response. So these are typically mental health or addiction or housing-related calls, could be food security related, but they don't necessarily need a policing enforcement nor an emergency medical like an ambulance response. So it's more of on the social and mental health wellness side.
The Social Diversion Program will begin starting November. It was discovered by BCN that the U of L's women's soccer team was forced to suspend its operations due to breaking COVID-19 regulations involving sport cohorts. In a statement released by the U of L, for the health and safety of our student athletes, the program and practices have been suspended for the time being and will resume based on advice from Alberta Health Services. Neil Langevin, director of Pronghorn Athletics, says, I'm extremely disappointed in the leadership of our women's soccer program and that we have to take this punitive action. Players are advised to quarantine for 14 days. Are you a parent who isn't sure about whether you should send your child back to public school with large class sizes? Micro classrooms or pandemic pods may be the answer. Kinder Studios in Calgary has a new initiative called the Micro School Program. Class sizes are limited to 8 children, and the company describes the classes as an alternative to traditional learning. The owner, Liz Hamzy, says she started this program out of a necessity for her own daughter in wanting to give her a more normal school experience.
This started because I have a little girl going into kindergarten. She is a hugger. She is not great at social distancing. So I wanted to set her up to go to a school where I feel like she would flourish in. She really did need that socialization aspect. And I wanted her to just go into school and have a somewhat of a normal school experience. I didn't want her introduction to school to be people wearing masks, people not being able to go for recess, teachers wearing masks. I wanted her to have that public school kindergarten experience that I had.
An innovation at Lethbridge College is allowing healthcare students to submit lab works remotely to their instructor. The simulated patient health environment for research and education, or SPHERE, allows students to work on a teaching bed that is equipped with video and audio recording equipment. SPHERE coordinator Sherry Wright tells BCN how it all works.
These tests can be super stressful and quite anxiety producing for the students. So the students will be able to come in, perform their practical exams, and all of it will be recorded using this technology, and it'll be uploaded to our server or an online server within the college, and then their instructor can view their exam and mark it at that time. In the past, this was all done face-to-face, or an instructor watching the student do it. With the new technology, it'll allow us to play back and to view what changes or what where the student needs to focus on.
The federal government has approved $10.5 million in funding for COVID-19 upgrades at food processing projects across the country. Just over $800,000 is going to the JBS meat plant in Brooks, Alberta. Cargill, which operates a large meat plant in High River, Alberta, is not on the initial list for approved projects. Officials say more announcements will be made in the coming weeks. Residents in a West Side neighborhood are getting frustrated with their cars getting broken into. Mike Mackenzie Grieve, a man who lives on Mohawk Road West, posted a video captured at 4:46 a.m. this morning that shows 2 individuals on bicycles circulating a home while one enters the vehicle. Mackenzie Grieve suggests that people install quality security cameras to combat this theft.
The cameras do provide a bit of peace of mind. They're not perfect, but they do help. And always just lock your vehicle and just try and keep on top of things. One nice option is actually the car cameras, the dash cams. So long as they don't actually get stolen themselves, they do record on motion. And if I had a dash cam installed on that vehicle, I would have got a clear shot of their face.
Horse racing in Lethbridge is gearing up to make a comeback. Starting tomorrow, the Rocky Mountain Turf Club is bringing back horse racing in a limited capacity. Rose Rossi from the Rocky Mountain Turf Club says that these events will feature a small crowd due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But she says that even though races will look different, she knows fans have been waiting since May to get back into the excitement of the chase.
Fans are ecstatic. We have had so many people calling or asking, and that's been all the way through. With our colony of our race family, I mean, the questions were always going and will be going, and so there are all the COVID regulations that must be met also in the backstretch. We have jockeys that come from Jamaica and New Mexico, various provinces like Winnipeg and the US, British Columbia. So it really brings everybody from everywhere.
For more information on the races, you can visit the Rocky Mountain Turf Club's website. Experts say the number of mammoth skeletons recovered at an airport construction site north of Mexico City has risen to at least 200, with a large number of pits still to be excavated at what may be the largest mammoth graveyard in the world. Archaeologists hope this may help solve the riddle of their extinction. Experts said finds are still being made, including signs humans may have made tools from the bones of the lumbering animals that died around 10,000 to 20,000 years ago. A car drove through a Black Lives Matter protest in Times Square Thursday night. Dozens of protesters had gathered around 8:10 p.m. over the death of Daniel Prude, a black man who died in March after he was taken into custody by police in Rochester, New York. The driver of a black Ford Taurus initially came to a stop for the protest, but after being surrounded by the crowd, accelerated through the demonstration and drove away. Officials said no one has been arrested. Police are investigating whether the car was affiliated with a nearby counter-protest. Chadwick Boseman's hometown honors the fallen star in a public memorial. Boseman was remembered as a hometown hero who brought a sense of pride to his native Anderson, South Carolina.
I didn't sleep Friday night because I looked at him as a younger brother, although he played my father. And he did it at an excellent level because to me, he is the epitome of Black excellence. How could he play those roles and be ill? It's a testament of his faith.
There are some great movies playing at the Movie Mill this weekend, including Bill and Ted Face the Music and Mission Impossible movies 3 and 4. With more, here is today's Movie Mill Minute.
The ruler of the future tells best friends Bill and Ted they must compose a new song to save life as we know it. But instead of writing it, they decide to travel through time to steal it from their older selves.
Song created by Preston Logan, performed tonight, will save reality as we know it.
Retired from active duty and training recruits for the Impossible Mission Force, Agent Ethan Hunt faces the toughest foe of his career, Owen Davian, who emerges to threaten Hunt and all that he holds dear, including the woman Hunt loves. Blamed for a terrorist attack on the Kremlin, Ethan Hunt and the entire IMF agency are disavowed by the U.S. government. While the president initiates the Ghost Protocol, forced to go off the grid, Hunt must somehow clear the agency's name and prevent another attack.
You're not gonna make it!
You're not helping.
Hard to believe we're already at our long weekend. We'll see the sunshine as we head into it, but we may see some showers this weekend as well. We'll have a full look at weather coming up right after the break. It was another beautiful day in the Windy City. Tonight, clear skies with a low of 12. Tomorrow, lots of sunshine with a high of 32. Sunday, periods of rain with a high of 14. Monday, cloudy with a 60% chance of showers and a high of 12. Tuesday, bringing more sunshine and a high of 19. A mix of sun and cloud on Wednesday with a high of 25. Thursday looks to be the same with a mix of sun and clouds and a high of 27. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 22 degrees with an average low of 7. Highest temperature on the state was recorded in 2003 at 35 degrees. Our record low was 1 degree in 1999. Sunrise was at 6:52 a.m. and sunset at 8:09 p.m. Looking at the national forecast for tomorrow now, Victoria will be clear skies with a high near 21. Clear skies and 22 for Vancouver, sunny and 29 for Calgary on Saturday. Cloudy and 19 for Edmonton. A mix of sun and cloud and 28 for Regina tomorrow. Sun and cloud and 25 for Saskatoon. A mix of sun and cloud for Winnipeg with a high near 27. Toronto has a chance of showers with a high of 24. A mix of sun and cloud with 30% chance of showers and 21 in our nation's capital. 30% chance of showers and 22 for Montreal. Fredericton should receive some rain and a high of 19. Foggy and 24 for Halifax. Sunny and 22 for Charlottetown. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, cloudy periods with a chance of showers and a high near 24. In the month of August, Canada has added 246,000 new jobs. This morning, Stats Canada released updated numbers showing that most new jobs recorded in the month were for full-time work. The Lethbridge and Medicine Hat region records the lowest unemployment rates in the province, sitting at 8.6%. Ryan Miller, CEO of Lethbridge Employment Agency Teamwork Training Limited, explains why Lethbridge is better off than other areas of Alberta.
Agriculture is a huge part of Southern Alberta's employment, and we've had a very, we're on the cusp of having a very good agricultural season. So employment has remained extremely strong with agriculture. And so that's just going to continue to drive the wellness of everything that touches agriculture, right? Other services, other vendors, whether it's car dealerships, whether it's new farm equipment, whether it's building supplies, whatever those things that touch the sector of agriculture, I think we're going to have some strength in our community as we finish off this year.
74% of full-time jobs in the Lethbridge and Medicine Hat region have been recovered since the beginning of the pandemic. Lethbridge businesses have gone through a lot with the economic shutdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. BCN's Jeanette Roche spoke with CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, Trevor Lewington, and he stresses the importance of buying local as businesses struggle to get their volumes back to normal.
There's been a number of studies over the years, and for every $1 you spend locally, it has an economic impact of $7. So sometimes people will think, well, I'm only going to Calgary to spend a few $100, but that actually turns into a few $1,000s of economic impact you're transferring to another community. The other aspect is that, to remember that sometimes a locally owned franchise, even though it's a nationally bannered business, that's still a local business with a local owner hiring local people. So when we talk about spending your money locally, we mean keeping it inside of our community, inside of our local economy.
Catch the full interview with Trevor Lewington coming up after the break. Farmers in Saskatchewan's southwest have half their crops in the bin as harvest progresses in the province. Saskatchewan Agriculture's crop report says harvest is quickly advancing due to warm and dry conditions in most of the province. Overall, 28% of crops have been combined and another 27% are swath or ready to straight cut. The report says yields are average, although they will be less in some areas due to hot, dry conditions over the last few weeks that have withered crops. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 230 points to 16,218. The Dow was down 159 points to 28,133. The S&P 500 was down 28.10 to 34.26. The Nasdaq was down 144.97 to 11,313. Oil was down $1.86 to 39.51 per barrel. Natural gas was up 3.04 to 2.58. Gold was up 3.04 to 19.33 an ounce. Silver was up 32 cents to 26.91 an ounce. Wheat is at $218 per metric ton. Barley is at $210. Canola is at $503. Corn is at $238 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 53 cents to 104.45. Feeder cattle were also up 18 cents to 138.50. Lean hogs were up 58 cents to 59.83. And the Canadian dollar was up slightly to 76.56 US.
Recapping one of her top news stories, Dr. Theresa Tam says cooler weather and fall celebrations starting with Labor Day weekend will mean new COVID-19 risks. She says if everyone follows well-known advice about wearing masks, staying distance, and not spending time indoors with lots of other people, we can keep the pandemic at a manageable level. And coming up after the break, how can $1 of spending benefit the local economy sevenfold? CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, Trevor Lewington, explains. But first, here's a look at what's happening in your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Beginning September 9th, Lethbridge's Sport Council's Outdoor Roving Gyms program will take place Mondays and Wednesdays from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. behind Nicholas Sharon Arena. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come enjoy an hour of fun and get active. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/roving gyms. 2020 marks the 40th anniversary of Terry Fox's Marathon of Hope, which will be held virtually on Sunday, September 20th. Support a worthy cause your way by registering as an individual, a family, or a virtual team. To find out more, visit terryfox.ca. Go back in time and see what it was like to live as a pioneer. Coyote Flats Pioneer Village is a Western heritage museum located 1.5 kilometers south of Pitcher Butte. Walk through the village and see a railway station, post office, fire hall, school, and so much more. The museum is open daily from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. with admission of $10 for adults or $20 per family. Mobility scooters are available to guests by donation. For more information, visit coyoteflats.org. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Our city's businesses have gone through a lot with the economic shutdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. To talk about its impact on Lethbridge and to share initiatives that are helping our city's small businesses is Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development at Lethbridge. Trevor, thanks so much for joining us on Skype today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, even if it virtually.
Absolutely, always a pleasure. Okay, so every city in Canada has been impacted by the pandemic. How is Lethbridge doing economically compared to other cities across Alberta?
Yeah, I mean, Lethbridge has a relatively diverse economy. Our foundation in agriculture has helped us weather past storms, and so I don't want to minimize the impact. It is significant, both in terms of job loss and potential impact to the business community. But Lethbridge has fared much better than the rest of the province so far, and we expect that to continue.
Well, that's good news, at least. What are the forecasted impacts of coronavirus on the economy?
Yeah, I mean, in the Lethbridge Medicine Hat employment region, we've seen a loss of about 15,000 jobs as an example. At the peak of the pandemic, we've since recovered about 4,000 of those. But Lethbridge Medicine Hat still has the lowest unemployment in the province. So it's a good news, bad news story. I mean, I don't want to minimize the story for those 15,000 people that were impacted, but it's proportionally far better than the rest of the province. Alberta as a whole, the forecast is that the economy will shrink by probably upwards of 11%, which is the single largest contraction basically since the Second World War. And the Lethbridge number is expected to be somewhere between 5 and 8%. So still significant. That's very painful, but again, relatively better performing than the rest of Alberta.
So where are we seeing growth and where are we seeing losses then?
Yeah, well, as you might expect, sectors like accommodation, the hotels, restaurants that were probably most significantly impacted by the closures and public health measures have taken the brunt of employment and business loss. But surprisingly to us, even sectors like manufacturing have struggled. We've seen significant slowdown in agri-food processing as an example. Because restaurants are closed, those products are not required. We've seen that back up through the value chain. So it has impacted broad sectors of the economy.
Wow. And what's being done to support economic recovery efforts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think all three levels of government have done a great job of putting many programs out there. That can sometimes be a challenge when businesses aren't quite sure how to navigate all of the different programs and supports. But whether it's income supports and business loans at the federal level, returning to business strategies and grants from the province, and even locally, the city's looking very heavily at stimulus projects and capital investments that will help get people back to work. So the good news is I think all three levels of government are actively looking at economic recovery. They're trying to coordinate their efforts. The challenge, of course, is if you're a business that's struggling, that help can't come fast enough.
So it's nice to see that the government's offering that aid, but has that financial aid that's been offered by federal and provincial governments, has it been enough for those small businesses to stay afloat?
Yeah, I mean, we have certainly seen business closures and business failures in our community. We're certainly not exempt, just like every other community across the country and around the world, arguably. That's the sad part, is when these business owners invest their blood, sweat, and tears and many years of their lives into building up these businesses, and circumstances beyond their control take them away. What we've heard is that business owners appreciate the cash that's been injected into markets. The governments have not. Predominantly, it's been grants as opposed to loans. So that puts money back in people's hands to make an impact. The challenge has been some of the commercial rent supports haven't been as well received by landlords, and so many businesses aren't seeing those savings passed on to them. So certainly there have been some programs that have been more successful than others.
Now, do you think the mask bylaw will affect businesses in Lethbridge?
Yeah, I mean, businesses, I think, have embraced the mask bylaw. I mean, they recognize that it's, again, not something that they have control. And for the most part, I think customers are, recognizing that they're not the mask police. It's not something that they've imposed. It is, of course, challenging that it adds extra complexity in terms of controlling the number of people coming in and out of your store, monitoring interactions, and just making sure your folks, whether it's your staff or your customers, are protected. But it definitely adds a new challenge and another complexity to just trying to do business.
Yeah, that's true. And it seems that most people are pretty compliant with the bylaw. I'm not seeing too much opposition out in public, that is. We're seeing a different thing online, of course, but yeah.
Well, yeah, the keyboard warriors behind social media are always much more brave behind in the peace and security of their own home. But certainly when I've been out and about, there are definitely people that are complying with the mask bylaw. I've not seen any data from the city that would suggest it's a significant compliance outage. There are always going to be people that have exemptions that are legitimate that we have to recognize. It's important not to judge people not wearing masks, of course. There are some reasons not to wear them. But it's also but it's also something that's been recommended from a public health perspective. And I think the vast majority of people in Lethbridge are just taking it as one more step to protect their neighbors and protect their families.
We were talking earlier about the loans and the grants, and it's great to see that a lot of these businesses can take advantage of some of the provincial and federal grants. I know in the beginning it was more of a loan, and I think some businesses shied away from accepting that because they were afraid that if their business closed, they would still have to owe back I think it was $40,000 back in the springtime. Have you seen much of that in terms of people not wanting to take advantage of it just out of fear?
Well, one of the things we've been advocating with government is to stay away from loan programs. So we've learned lessons from natural disasters like Fort McMurray and High River. And in those cases, governments relied very heavily on loans to get businesses back to work. The challenge was that when those loans became due, often businesses hadn't recovered sufficiently to be able to make those payments. So it actually just deferred the problem 6 months down the road. Most programs that have been rolled out, both provincially and federally, have been grants, so they're non-repayable. It gets cash back into the economy. Business owners can, pay their people. They can get people back to work. They can spend on inventory, and that's really what the stimulus is meant to do: is get the economy moving again, get liquidity back into people's hands to have an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, assuming that this pandemic clears up and things ever get back to normal over the next few months, hopefully, fingers crossed, what are you hearing from locals as to how long it will take to get business volumes back to normal?
I think that's the magic question. No one really knows when the end of this pandemic will be, and there's obviously a wide range of forecasts. Some people have said it will be years, not months, and I think that's the uncertainty that's causing the business community the most anxiety. Certainly, I think all of us can plan for a few months or perhaps even a part of a year. But talking out into 2021 and 2022, if some of these restrictions come and go with multiple waves of the virus, there could be some significant impacts. So I think obviously the sooner we can all get back to whatever the new normal is, I hate using that overused phrase, but as soon as we can get there, that's where people will be able to sort of return to their spending levels and their activity levels and move on. But there's no doubt there's going to be disruptions, and we could see other challenges in the future if we have to pull back on some of the recovery and some of the reopening.
Yeah, well, let's hope that it's soon, for sure. Now, how important is it right now for residents to buy local whenever possible?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that people spend money in the local economy. There's been a number of studies over the years, and for every $1 you spend locally, it has an economic impact of $7. So sometimes people will think, well, I'm only going to Calgary to spend a few $100, but that actually turns into a few $1,000s of economic impact you're transferring to another community. The other aspect is that, to remember that sometimes a locally owned franchise, even though it's a nationally bannered business, that's still a local business with a local owner hiring local people. So when we talk about spending your money locally, we mean keeping it inside of our community, inside of our local economy.
Right. That's really important to remember that too. I think sometimes we kind of lose sight of that, especially as you kind of illustrated how far reaching that is. It's a good one
That
to
has
remember.
a big impact.
For sure. Recently, the Lethbridge Region Economic Recovery Task Force opened a physical location, or a one-stop shop, right, where business owners can meet with advisors to gain strategies on how they can function successfully in this new COVID environment. So tell us about this.
Yeah, so we're very fortunate to have a number of professionals that have volunteered and come forward. So we have a number of lawyers, accountants, insolvency trustees, human resources consultants, you name it, we've got expertise available. And all of these professionals have come forward to support the business community. They're volunteering their time to provide initial consultations. The university also stepped forward. They've donated the use of the Penny Building downtown. They've made space available to us to allow us to host these sessions. So on Mondays and Thursdays, business owners can come down to the Penny Building, they can book an appointment, and depending on what kind of advice or expertise they need, we'll connect them with a local expert that can get them started and get them pointed in the right direction. So whether it's financial or legal, the idea is to just get people pointed in the right direction and have them know what next steps they should take.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. And that just began this week, right?
We opened on Monday and saw our first clients on Monday. And again, today we had our volunteers down there. So I'm incredibly grateful to all of those amazing professionals who stepped forward and to the university for the use of that space.
Yeah, and you were saying that the advisors are volunteers?
That's correct. So, I mean, these are all very busy people that would normally, be managing their own business portfolios and billing for hours and things like that. And they recognize the importance of helping the business community. That's not to say that it's unlimited free advice. Ultimately, if you decide that there's a course you need to take, you'll have to pursue that with those folks and others in the community. But again, the initial consultation, the initial advice to get people started, we're taking care of that because it's how we think will accelerate the recovery.
That's amazing that they're willing to give of their time and expertise to help other business owners. That's really nice. So what business backgrounds do they represent?
So like I said, we've got a number of lawyers. So there's about 50 members of the Lethbridge Bar Association, all with various different areas of practice. We've got accountants, folks that specialize in insolvency. So if people feel like they're up against a debt wall and maybe looking at bankruptcy, that's not the only option. We want people to know that there may be multiple paths. Business owners that have had to perhaps change employment contracts or lay staff off, we've got some folks with HR expertise because that can be hard to navigate, and rules in Alberta recently changed around employment standards. So what you knew a year ago has changed, and so it's important that people be aware of some of those changes. And again, if someone comes in with a problem that we don't have an expert for, we've got a great community in Lethbridge. We'll do our best to find someone who can speak to it. We've also got business advisors available at Tech Connect. So that's the technology incubator here in town. And all of those mostly focused on entrepreneurship and business startups. But all of those advisors are available virtually. And again, that is all free. That is all paid for by the task force to, again, get the business community back up on their feet as fast as possible.
That's great. And then on the flip side, what kind of response have you received from the business community?
Yeah, I mean, the early stages has been good. I think, people are just becoming aware of what hours and what processes. We are having people complete a bit of an intake process because we do want to educate them a little bit on, we need to understand what their business challenges are. Of course, we do want them to take precautions when they come down to the center. They have to know that they need a mask and, those kinds of things. But the initial response has been good. And I think people are just appreciative of having a place to turn to. There's no judgment. It's, again, just advice. People can come, feel comfortable that, no one's going to laugh at them. No one's going to point out the errors of their ways. We're all in this together. This is an unprecedented situation. Again, it's how do we solve problems and how do we move forward?
Awesome. Well, with that, we are out of time. Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, thanks so much for joining us today.
Appreciate the opportunity to be with you again today.
Sometimes life storms can really flip us upside down, causing a lot of turmoil in our lives. And for those who are going through it, sometimes we need a lifeline. Joining me now to talk about it is Dr. Edward E. Moody Jr. He's the Associate Dean of the School of Education at North Carolina Central University, and he's also author of the book, First Aid for Emotional Hurts. Eddie, welcome to Bridge City News.
Oh, it's good to be with you. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Hal.
You bet. You're joining us from Music City, USA, Nashville, Tennessee. Now you say that hurting people desperately need someone to talk to. What does it take to become an effective listener?
Oh, well, getting our minds off of ourselves, kind of thinking about what the other person's saying. And so often we try to fix the person. Just forget that, let it go out the window. Pay attention to what the person says. And I think it helps us sometimes to kind of paraphrase, what someone talks about. So let's say you've got a friend, they're like, oh no, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job with this whole COVID-19 crisis. Instead of saying, no, you're not going to lose your job, just listen and a little bit of that. And so this is kind of concerning. And after we listen to them a bit, we can get a chance to share with them, well, the Lord can help us through something like that, or share a passage with them. But the first thing, or the most important thing, is just give them time to tell their story, which gives them an opportunity to get that out. They're used to people trying to fix them, if you will. Just let them talk about what it is that bothers them, that's giving them difficulty, and people tend to feel better after doing a little bit of that.
Now, in recent months, we've witnessed many tragedies and other disasters. Eddie, what should we do, or maybe not do, to help those who are suffering?
Well, we don't have to really say anything. It's a bit like the example in Job when his friends went and visited him, and the scripture says they were just with him for a couple of days. They listened to him. So it's important just to be with someone, to be present with them, let them talk, pat them on the back if it's safe to do that in a COVID-19 situation. But we're just trying to be present with them. Too often people say, well, I want to say the right thing, or I want to quote a particular passage. And it's really better to listen, to be there with them, and then to just go through your mind and think, what does this person need? So like after a tragedy, there's all kinds of needs. There's little tasks that need to be taken care of. So offer to take care of one of those tasks and just get busy fulfilling a particular need that a person can have, because there's so many things that have to be dealt with after a tragic event.
And you mentioned COVID-19 earlier. I'm thinking of sometimes people need a hug, but then you can't even give that person a hug, so that makes it even that much more devastating and that much more tragic. Now, you say that being a helper does not necessarily mean that we're always pleasant. Why is that?
Yeah. Well, people can be getting off track. So I talked to someone today that has a child that's involved in substance abuse, and really that particular individual needs something that's not, they don't really need to be coddled, or they don't need to be enabled or rescued. And so sometimes we're giving words to people like, you really need to consider what you're doing. You need to think that through a bit. And at times we even let them bear the consequences of what it is that they've done. So for example, with the substance abuse situation, person might get arrested, and instead of quickly bailing them out of jail, we may set some parameters, or make some requirements for counseling, or set up some sort of procedures to take care of that person more effectively. So it's not always, when you're helping someone, sometimes they don't really appreciate the help, but that's some of the best kind of help. And if you think of the Bible, there's examples of that there, Nathan and David and so forth. And that's really the kind of person that we're called to be when we're trying to reach out and help another individual.
I've had some friends with a family whose son ended up in jail, and the father says, I want to let him rot in there for a few days just so he can learn his lesson. Tough love. What do you think of something like that when a dad says that?
It's not a bad idea. I mean, I don't like the word rot, but There's probably several people that ended up in correctional facilities. And by the way, I worked for several years as a psychologist in a correctional facility. And I would often say that's one of the best places a person can be. You can't really engage in substance abuse. There's occasions where people figure out a way to do that. But for the most part, it's an opportunity to just have some quietness. Sometimes we have treatment there in those particular facilities. That's what I was doing. And honestly, it's a good way to get someone's attention and really be able to help them get out of the situation they're in. So maybe not use the word rot, but we are thinking strategically. And then when someone does come out of that, when we bail them out of jail, or even when they're talking with law enforcement and in particular judicial officials, it's good to have, you're going to go back if you don't participate in these particular activities, or if you begin to do something that's getting you down the trail of getting in trouble again.
Eddie, many people believe we need to really understand our limitations as helpers. What are some of the risks or liabilities?
Well, just taking on someone's behavior and thinking that you can control that. In other words, this person, let's go back with the substance abuse. It's on me. If we're thinking it's on me if that person doesn't stop, or if that person doesn't get right with the Lord or doesn't get out of this. You can't change anyone. You can't make a person do anything. So we can offer assistance, we can offer help to people, but we get into trouble when we begin to tie our self-esteem or tie our well-being into something that someone else does that we can't control. So we have to understand we're really a tool. We're like an ambassador, a representative of the Lord. We can offer some assistance. We can try to reach out and be there for individuals, but we can't fix them. And really, ultimately, it's up to them as to what they end up doing. And we can't take on too much of that. That's where the enabling gets in, and sometimes people manipulate that and use it against us, and it's bad for them as well.
Now, in your book, you talk about how important resilience is and how people recover from trauma. Is it possible for a person to nurture resilience?
Oh, it is. And we're seeing that a bit now with the whole COVID-19 situation. So if we try to guard against anything bad happening or try to protect from every eventuality, it really pushes back against resilience, developing resilience. And so, for example, in our own children, it's good when they have the consequence of getting a bad grade after they've not studied and so forth, someone losing a job after doing poorly or after misbehaving at that particular site. What tends to happen is when we have difficulties, it tends to help us develop and to become more effective people, and we tend to learn from that. And if you think about the scripture, some of the people that were most effective were those that really had some difficulties in life. Think about Joseph. He's sold into slavery, he's mistreated by his brother, and he's forgotten in jail. But that developed him into a person where he could end up being the prime minister really of Egypt. We see that in historical figures as well. You think about the president Teddy Roosevelt in the U.S., lots of sickness as a young person and a lot of tragedies in his life. And it probably helped him develop into the leader that he became. So when something bad happens, the scripture says God takes it and he uses those things for good. If we kind of know that in the back of our head, it's bad, it's not pleasant what's happening to me, but there's a God that's working this to my advantage and turning me into the person he wants me to be. If we have that in our mind, it does help us to deal with it more effectively. And down the road, we can often look back and say, wow, I didn't like that, but it sure did help me become, a more successful person, or the person that I believe God wants me to be.
Now, Eddie, we live with myths in our lives and how life really should be. What are some of these, and how can we develop a balanced and correct perspective on life?
Well, there's even myths that Christians have, and one that I dealt with often in my work was that Christians don't get depressed. And so we hear things like that, or we hear things like bad things don't happen to good people, right, or that life is always easy, life is always good. And so one of the ways we push back on those myths is we just we focus on reading the Bible. Look at the followers of Christ, the disciples of his. They did not have just wonderful lives. They were not wealthy. They died, most of them poor and in bad ways. And so we can see that God took the bad things in their lives, he used them for good. And we can also see, if we are a student of the scripture, where people experience difficulties, things that we often hear that aren't true. And as we begin to realize, no, there are some Christians that get depressed. There are some Christians who their children pass away suddenly. And there are people that do everything right and lose everything. It helps us to kind of have a better view of the world, a more accurate view, and it helps us to kind of weather those storms as we all deal with them as we come into them in our lives.
I recently lost my nephew. It's my wife's youngest sister, youngest son, and I got to tell you, it's been really traumatic for our family, but by the grace of God, we are getting through it right now, through his strength. Now, you include an entire chapter on depression. Why is depression increasing, Eddie, in spite of counseling and medication available today?
I think how we've gotten away from the Lord in many ways. And, just like in the scripture, you see Jonah trying to go the other way, and that can lead people to be depressed like that as well. I also think just some of the circumstances, for example, right now, people are often lonely. People can't work the way they used to. Sometimes they can't go and worship like they used to do. So those circumstances put them in a situation where they're more susceptible to depression. And I think there's an example of, like, Jeremiah in the Bible is an example of that. And then I think there are people that are prone to depression, and just like if you had cancer, there's medications and there are treatment regimens that help, but they're never quite perfect. And so the medications and even like some of the therapies that we use are not always perfect. And there's some people that's just their thing, they're a thorn in the flesh, if you will, that they must deal with. So I think as Christians, we need to realize we're all in this thing together. Probably at any point, you mentioned the passing of your nephew, that could lead people in your family to be down for a period of time, and that's a natural thing. It's not what we would call clinical depression, but they feel pretty bad, and so all of us are going to have times like that. And I think we have to realize that's just what happens to us in this life, but we're there to support each other, to bear the burdens, and to know that God walks with us as we go through those times, and we can get better. And we will get better if we do the right things and stick with the Lord.
Yeah, with my getting back to my nephew here, parents should never have to bury their kids. It's a tough time. I couldn't imagine what parents in the Second World War, the First World War went through. Now, Eddie, we live in a culture that seems to glorify the mantra, if it feels good, do it. Now, that could lead to abuse and dependence, though, can it not?
Oh, it can, and it leads to not feeling too good. There's a lot of research that talks about basically people going and trying to have a lot of pleasure, and just things that you and I might enjoy or we enjoyed when we were kids are no longer fun for them. And so an example of something like that is pornography, and that's a big problem today. And so some people begin to engage in that particular activity, and it does things to their brain. And what we'll find sometimes with the research is then they can't even enjoy a wholesome relationship with their spouse. They're married to, guy's married to his wife, and he can get to a point where he can't even have satisfaction in that situation. So there's a lot, the scripture teaches this, but the research shows us this too. When it's all about having fun and it's all about pleasure, it takes away from the pleasurable things in life. And I think we may be picking up a little of that now with the current situation. Sports, until now have been taken away from us, and a lot of the things we used to do for fun, we can't really do now. But on the other hand, it gives us the opportunity to see a walk in the park, or just enjoying the outdoors a little bit, or nice conversation with someone, social distancing, of course. That's a wonderful thing, and it may end up kind of restarting or helping us reset the things that really can bring pleasure to us.
Eddie, let's talk about addiction for just a moment. Once again, let's circle back to that. Sometimes people replace one addiction with another. Let's chat a bit about that.
Well, absolutely. Back in the old days when I was doing some of this work, it seemed like everyone that used to abuse alcohol or some other substance now was a smoker, and on the breaks, they were out there just smoking away. And I'm like, this can't be good. So there can be a bit of that. The scripture talks about, don't be drunk with wine, but really be drunk with the Holy Spirit. And I also used to be a pastor. And so really, I think in many people's lives, we're trying to help them to replace these addictions. If you stop a behavior, you have to replace it with some other behavior. And so I'll give you an example. I had a person that was just working, doing a lot of things in the church, and I had someone come to me and said, I'm afraid for George. I just think he's doing too much. I think he's going to wear himself out. And I just patted him on the back and said, it's okay. In other words, George knows exactly what he's doing. And so I didn't go into this with them, but like George is working hard so that he just works himself almost to exhaustion. Then he goes to bed at night. And that's kind of what he's got to do. He's replaced Jesus activities with these other things. That's kind of what he's got to do until he gets a reset. So when someone's addicted, it impacts them on every level, and you can't get away from what it does to a person's brain. So it's almost like you reset things. You have to almost detox, whether it's a behavior or an activity. You have to kind of reset all that.
Dr. Edward E. Moody Jr., author of the book First Aid for Emotional Hurts. Thanks for joining me today from Nashville, Tennessee.
Thank you, Hal. It's been a pleasure to be with you today.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.